Yeah, hello everybody to our lecture Global Economics. And yeah, at first I want to announce that yesterday the annual report of the German Council of Economic Experts is published and was handed over here to Chancellor Scholz. And of course, this is, so to speak, the economic perspective of Germany. And of course, the perspective of Germany is highly relevant for Europe or for the EU. And of course, we are still the fourth largest economy in the world. So it is also relevant for the development in a global side. Yeah, so maybe if you want, you can have just a look inside this report. You can download it here if the processor is working. Right now not. Anyhow, well, I also already announced, and this I will repeat, the two talks I've organized for this semester. The first one is for Dr. Jörg Rahn. Maybe somebody of you already know him because last year I have already also invited him, and yeah, he will also talk about a macroeconomic topic, and especially what we were also talking about, where is the global economy going to? And he works actually in strategic investment area. So what he is looking at in general, where is then the change when the stock markets will maybe in the future decline and I have to shift my investment from stock markets to bonds, and when is the right point in time to do it? Well, and for this, of course, you have to have a good understanding, a good feeling what is the what is globally the framework with in which the economy is developing. And so he just asked, especially for Germany, in the report of the economic experts, there we have the forecast that we are in a recession, especially in Germany. And it is also the question, what is going on in Europe? And also, is it really better in the United States or not? Or do we only talk about that the situation there is better? And so he will pose the question, do we make it that although we have right now a very serious situation, do we come out there within the business cycle that there is the upswing again? So I think this will be quite interesting. And the other one is then directly from Christopher Suber, who is right now a member of the scientific staff of the Council of Economic Experts in Germany. And his topic is especially, you see it here, macroeconomics and productivity. So he has then the look, where is potential output in Germany, especially what we were also talking about. And yeah, maybe to have a look in this report, well, this is 500 pages, but this is, so to speak, then the large version which I want to have from you for your countries. So maybe you can get from this also some ideas what you can write in your country reports. Yeah, this talk will be in German, but anyhow, it will of course also be possible to follow this talk then, and if you have questions, you can of course post these questions then also in English. This will be on Tuesday, 5th of December. So hopefully you have time to join. And now we want to go on with our right now theoretical part in this lecture, since I already showed you many data. So, but where is my mouse? Here it is. So we were talking about the so-called Mundell-Fleming model, and this started from the classical ISLM model, adding the international interaction of our countries via the so-called ZZ curve, and then the what is behind just the equality in the balance of payments, and this then we modeled where is it here, the equality of current account equals capital account, and from this then we said we obtain a positive dependence between the interest rate I and the income Y. And all this we put then together, and this was then the main result last time, where we had then that we have these three equations, and then we have to distinguish between the so-called exogenous and endogenous variables, and endogenous within the model we are determining income and interest rates, and about this we will talk then together today. We have to distinguish in the sense of these international connections of our country with abroad is the exchange rate, and there we can have two exchange rate regimes. One is that the exchange rate is flexible, then this, or let's take this in red, then the exchange rate would be also an endogenous variable, or let's take this in green, or this red flexible exchange rates, and in green if we have fixed exchange rates, then again Y and I would be our endogenous variables, but oh, this I forgot here. I see there also plus government expenditure is missing. That in this case, if we have fixed exchange rates, then we have to intervene into the market if we have here capital flows, because if we have a capital inflow to our country, then this would mean that our currency have to appreciate. But if we now say, well, the exchange rate with the abroad currency is fixed, what do we have then to do? Then we have to increase the demand for the foreign currency so that we have still the same exchange rate. And this would mean buying the foreign currency, we have to print money, so we have to increase our monetary base. So in this case, not the exchange rate is an endogenous parameter, but the monetary base M is the endogenous parameter. But in both regimes, then of course we have three variables, we have three equations, and hopefully from these three equations we can then calculate our endogenous variables. I see if you have some time, maybe we make some exercise. I think in the beginning, no, not here, but in the former slides, you found there also this old example from macroeconomics where we have only the two equations, and I gave you explicit functions for the IS and the LM curve. And so we could do this here also, that we assume some explicit function for the dependence via the ZZ curve, and then you have three equations. Okay, this was what we last on Monday were talking about. Well, now in order to get an idea what is this ZZ curve about, we want to talk, and until now we only have qualitatively talking about the dependence of interest rates and exchange rates. Because we said we have here, let's go back in the capital account, especially we have here the differential between our interest rate and the interest rate abroad. And if our interest rate is higher, then we are more attractive than the investment in another country. And this will induce a capital flow. And if we have a capital flow, this will induce an exchange rate, and a change in the exchange rate. And for this, we want to more specifically talk about the dependence between interest rates and exchange rates. And this is done in the so-called uncovered interest rate parity. And let's have a look at this. Hopefully in macroeconomics, I talked about the so-called yield curve. And yeah, just by accident, this was a topic today in the lecture. And there, if you remember it, the other ones, there we compared two investment decisions. Investing in the long term and investing in the short term. And now, conceptually, we are doing more or less the same. Because what I told already is now we have also two investment decisions. We can invest at home and we can invest abroad. So let's do it in the same way. We start from the perspective of Europe. So we start with an investment of €1. And what do we have? We have an interest rate today in euros in the Eurozone or in Germany, and we have an interest rate in the United States. So then what happens if we invest for €1, let's say maybe 2.5% in Europe? What do we have after 1 year? if it's, let's say, 4%. 4% of €1 is, yep, yes, of course, nothing else. Just €1 times the interest rate factor 1 plus the interest rate. So we obtain €1 times 1 plus, in example 4%, or in general, we are in the advanced part of your studies, so now I use more letters and not that much numbers. The interest rate in the Eurozone. So, if we compare this with an investment in the United States, with an interest rate in the United States, $. So there we start with €1, but now we have a problem with our investment in the United States with our €1. If you are flying to New York and you are stepping in to one coffee shop and you want to drink a coffee and you say, here is €1, or in New York you have to maybe €10. May I get a coffee? Do you get a coffee? No, because why? Do you have to pay with US dollars? Well, fortunately, today we can, given the today exchange rate, exchange our €1 into $1. So we have to multiply our euro with our exchange rate today. So this is the nominal exchange rate in indirect notation. Now we have US dollars. Let's see how much we have today. I think on Monday it was around 1.07, or euro dollar still 1.07. Okay. So now we have $1.07 US cents. Now we can buy US government bonds, maturity 1 year, and this means multiplying with the interest rate in the United States. And now we want to compare these two investments. But still we have a problem in comparing these two investments. And what is the problem in this state of the investment we have right now? Let's say this is 4%, and in the United States it is 5%. Then on the left we have 1.04, and on the right we have 1.07 times 1.05. The number is of course higher, but what is the problem with the comparison of these two numbers? Yeah. Yes. Definitely. We have here different units of the measurement, so we cannot compare the numbers. But now we have a little problem because this is an investment, and let's say this is an investment in a government bond maturity 1 year. So now we are 1 year later, and unfortunately we don't know the exchange rate tomorrow or in 1 year. So as an investor, in order to compare these two investment possibilities, is now that we have to make again expectations about the exchange rate. And then in our mind, we re-exchange the US dollar 1.07 times 1.05 back with an expected exchange rate into euros. So for this, then we have to divide this by the expected exchange rate T plus 1 in 1 year. And now we can compare these two investment possibilities. Because now we have a number in euro on the left and we have a number in euro of the right. And then, assuming perfect capital markets, this means we can always invest the volume we want in whatever investment possibility we think of. Also, what we now assume is that we are risk neutral. Risk neutral means we don't care about is our investment in the United States or is it in Europe. And actually, but this is my personal view, we are right now in a situation where I would think about, is my money lying in the United States or is my money lying in Europe? Since I do not know what is happening in the United States within 1.5 years or in 2 years, it is again in November, in the first week of November. In 2 years, we will have a new election. Oh, is it already next year? No, I think. Actually, I'm not. No. Let's see this. This is important. If I'm wrong. I think, yeah, next year. Oops. Maybe the 4th of November or something like this. Next year, yeah. So it will be in the first week of November next year. So already next year. So I'm even more puzzled what happens in the United States. Well, we can be also be puzzled in Europe, but I think the situation in Europe is a little bit more stable if I think about the guy who is maybe running for president in the United States. But this is my only personal point of view. Okay, so we don't care about this. And the last one is home investment and abroad investment are perfect substitutes. So also this we don't care about possible differences between home and abroad. So these are, of course, quite strict assumptions. But if more or less the capital markets are functioning well, then on average, these assumptions are quite okay. But still, you have to keep in mind what we derive from these assumptions now is not a natural law. And especially, I think in macroeconomics and also in this lecture, I always talk about this. All what we are talking here, although I'm doing, I think, quite a lot of mathematics with you, is still we are dealing with our own behavior. What we are doing, what we want to do is to describe within models, in concepts, and then, of course, also with mathematical concepts in order to get some quantitative argument. What we want to do is to describe our own behavior. And human beings can behave, or they can decide not to behave in this direction we have, for example, argued here, where we discussed the direction of the dependence on interest rates, on exchange rates, and so on. Of course, everybody is allowed to act it the other way around. But in a macro view or in a global view even, as we have it in this lecture, then we are interested on the behavior on average, and on average it is quite okay. Okay, when these assumptions hold, then we can think of what happens when these two numbers are differing. Well, then we are again starting to argue economically, and this means if I get in the United States more than in Europe, then I'm going to the United States with my money. But what does this mean? Now, again, the market argumentation. This increases the demand for investments in bonds in the United States. Well, if more people knocking on the door at the US government and ask, please let me invest in your government bonds, then the US government bond then can say, well, there are so many people standing outside, I do not have to give them 5%, I try it with 4%. So what then will happen is that the yield will decline in the investment area where at a starting point I would have a higher yield. Well, and now again, perfect capital markets means not only that there is a possibility to invest, means also that it is quite fast, that it is just a click on my computer to invest. And this is then, of course, about always the process, how well is supply, demand, my market equilibrium process is functioning. And if we assume that this price process is quite good functioning, then this means more or less instantaneously or quite fast, the yields of the two investment possibilities have to be in the same region, and in the end, they have to be equal. But this follows only from these assumptions. So this is no law that it has to be. But if we are assuming that we may have made quite good assumptions, that we could say, okay, these two numbers have to be equal. This I have written down also here. And then we could say, okay, we have here now a direct dependence between the home interest rate, the abroad interest rate, and the exchange rate. So, and this now we can use as more or less the condition for our international connection within our model for our ZZ curve. So this is again only the argumentation I have made already with you together. So if we then assume that we have this condition to behold, then we have to admit that we assume that the abroad interest rate, or especially the interest rate in the United States, is given exogenously. And if this holds, then from this assumption, if uncovered interest rate parity will hold, since this is given exogenously, this means that the home interest rate I or I euro, for example, for the euro EU US example, has to follow the abroad interest rate I star, or in our example, the US interest rate. Well, and for this, I already gave you on Monday the time series, I think. Yes, here it was. That this assumption is quite a good assumption, that we actually also, for the case of the Eurozone and the United States, we see that more or less we have always still to follow the United States. Well, and for me, the reason is still, why is it so? Well, we are not cooperating that much within Europe. Let's see what we are doing in relation to Ukraine, and let's see what we are doing in relation to the conflict in the Near East. They are always, the United States have it easier. They just go there with their two large ships at the coast of this country. Well, we even do not have the possibility to do this. And then, of course, you have another power position or position of power in these conflicts. Okay, but let's go back to theory. Well, what does this then mean? We have in generally at first qualitatively assumed that we have this positive dependence between I and Y. And now we take this concept of uncovered interest rate parity, the adjective uncovered comes from the point that we here say we feed in the expected exchange rate, because maybe you have also already in other lectures already heard when you talked about international capital markets. What we also can do is that we bilaterally can fix the exchange rate tomorrow. So we write down in a contract today, within a year, I'm allowed to exchange €1 with $1 and 10. And of course, this you could also feed in this argumentation. Then we would have just to exchange the expected exchange rate with our forward contract, with our forward interest rate we fixed today, but then we have to admit we find that this equality sign will not hold. There we, in history, we find quite often that the so-called covered interest rate parity, to assume that this holds so that I only have to look up the forward exchange rate and then I can calculate everything, this wouldn't be a good assumption. So this just for the explanation of the word uncovered and covered, then you take the forward exchange rate. So, but what does this mean if we take uncovered interest rate parity to be hold? This means especially perfect capital mobility. Well, and this means, of course, if there is a differential between the yield I get abroad from home, then an infinitely amount of money will instantaneously flow from one region to the other region. That in practical, in a practical way, this is not possible. This we do not discuss at this theoretical point. But if we assume that it strongly holds, then instantaneously we would have to move the capital there. We have then an adjustment, and then this is argued on this slide before, then this means we more or less fixed with our interest rate by the interest rate from abroad. And this means that more or less we have a movement of the ZZ curve of the positive slope, that we have then a horizontal line. So all the argumentations which will follow will also hold for the positive slope, but it is a little bit easier to show it when we now assume this horizontal line. And as I already asked, it is also a quite good assumption that we have to follow the interest rate of the United States, which we see in the history empirically. So overall equilibrium would then look like this with the ISLM and ZZ curve. So this would then mean that we have a simultaneous equilibrium of three markets: the goods and services markets at home, the money market at home, and the international market where we are exchanging the different currencies. And what we are now want to discuss, what happens now within this model if we are doing economic policy, especially if we are doing fiscal or if we are doing monetary policy. And this we want to analyze in these two different regimes, where once we have fixed exchange rates, then again remember, fixed exchange rate means also that the exchange rate is an exogenous parameter, and then M becomes exogenous, and also income and interest rate. Home interest rate is exogenous. And if we go to flexible exchange rate, then we just interchange these two variables. And now we want to start to argue, which I shown, fixed exchange rates and monetary policy. There we already see everything. This means, yeah, well, let's see what you still have in mind from the other course. This was wrong. This we do not need, this we need. So, fixed E and monetary policy. What will happen? Monetary policy, this means increase of M. So we are start to print money. Which curve then will move? Let's write it down here again. We have the IS curve, C plus I plus G plus X minus M. we have the LM curve, M over P equals L, Y, and I. And we have the ZZ curve, where we have NX equals CA and UIP. To behold, then from this we know that this is a horizontal line. So where do we find with a direct effect the money aggregate? Well, actually, you can just have a look at what I've just written down. Where do you find the M? Here. Yes. This shifts the LM function, and do you know in which direction we are shifting? So let's do it again. How do we get the LM function? This was E, LD, and M. This was money demand, decreasing in interest rates, opportunity costs argument, speculative motive. We are holding as more money, the lower the interest rate. And equilibrium, this was money supply, M, and this we translated into the YI diagram. This LD, money demand, is depending on one specific income level. And we argued the more income we have, the more money we want to have. Because if we are richer, then we will buy more things. So if we are buying more things, then we need more money. So then this equilibrium point here defines us one dependence between one I and one specific income from the equilibrium at the money market. And this two numbers here, then we can put in the interest rate income diagram. Let's assume Y1 is somewhere here and the interest rate one is just this one here. So here we have 1 point. And what we now do is we think about what happens at our money market if income is increasing. So if we maybe somewhere here at some higher income, what happens in the left diagram? First, we have to think which curve is shifting, and then we have to think in which direction the curve is shifting. So the first one, we just have to identify where do we find the income. Yep. So this here, yep, because just here we find the income. And it is shifting upwards because now we are richer. So giving the same interest rate, we are now richer. And if we are now richer, then we have to have a higher money demand. So we have to move here to the right, or let's say up to the upper right there. Okay? So for an LD depending on a higher income, then this point here would correspond to the original interest rate I1. But this thought experiment we have to make for every interest rate. So also what happens to this point? What happens to this point? All these points are moving to the right. So in general, we obtain then a new LD curve. So we obtain here a new cut of the new ID curve at I2. This we have to move to the right at here, and income has also increased, so we obtain here a second point. Well, and then this thought experiment we are doing for all different incomes. And this then means we obtain an LM curve which is increasing. And now we can ask ourselves what happens when M is increasing. What happens in the right picture, in the left here? What happens in this diagram? Again, we have to identify in which curve do we find M and what happens then to the curve. Yep. Yep. So we have it here. Money supply curve, yes. Yep. Yep. It has to shift to the right to higher numbers, of course. Let's say we have a price level of 2, money amount of 100, then we have 50, and when we say now we have money amount of 150, then we are at the number 75. Okay, this then shifts to the right. And then, so to speak, we have with this new supply curve do all the things we have done with the old money supply curve. So we have now here 2 new interest rates corresponding now to our new money supply. These 2 LD curves are still the same, so we have to look again at the same income levels, but now we see here we have moved to the right. The money demand curve is falling in interest rates. So now the interest rate corresponding to the old income Y1 is now lower because we are ending up here, maybe 1I prime. And this means we are not at this point, but we are at 1I prime, and this is a little bit below. The same argumentation we have for Y2. And then again, we generalize this argumentation. This we have again to do for every income. And so we get a shift of the LM curve. If we have an increase of M, that LM is shifting to the right. Okay, but now we are out of equilibrium because all 3 lines have to cut always in the same point if we assume that all these adjustment processes is as fast as possible. So if we look then, and this you really have to keep in mind, we go now through the process stepwise, but this doesn't mean that everything happens one after the other. We have no dynamic model within here this is just a one-shot model, so everything what we are arguing now is happening simultaneously. But let's start with the point that we say, well, of course, the first impact is more or less in the home country. And then we can take our old result, well, a shift of LM to the right means just that we are moving downward here. But what this means, this would mean that also the interest rate would fall. But then, so to speak, the capital markets or the international capital markets stepped in. There, we assumed that uncovered interest rate parity holds. And this means that our interest rate cannot change. But if our interest rate cannot change, it has to directly move back, and therefore, so to speak, the LM curve has to be pushed from the international markets back on our old LM curve. Because think of these capital movements which would start. We are now much less attractive compared to the abroad interest rate because our interest rate has fallen. So all our capital moves out. And what does this imply? This just imply that our money amount decreases because all the money is going abroad. And how long will go this process? Until, due to uncovered interest rate parity, the exchange rate has again adjusted because we have, in nominal ways, really increased our money amount. There is now more euros. Now, due to uncovered interest rate parity, the exchange rate adjusts, but this decreases our real money, so to speak, in general, and this shifts back our LM curve. And so the first part is we going there, and we going there, and then this more or less means that with monetary policy, we can do almost nothing. Well, this is also not that surprising because here we are arguing via the monetary aggregate. In practice, we know that the instrument is more or less the interest rate. Well, and if we cannot change the interest rate, then there is also no real monetary policy. So here, then, this is the implication that with fixed interest rate, the central bank has to adjust their balance sheet just in the amount they have in the first step increased the money as a starting point. Okay, then let's go to the situation with flexible exchange rates. Again, we have the same starting point, and if we go back in time, let's move him a little bit away. Do you know who he is? Yep. Yes, this is Mario Draghi. Former president of the ECB, I think until 2019. Let's have a look if this is right. Wikipedia is always a good source. ECB 2019. I'm quite good. Okay. Well, let's go here in this lecture to the English version. Yeah, he is a very known guy. He was also then in the aftermath Prime Minister of Italy, and he starts as a academic in economics and professor at where he was. Do we see this? I think in the United States in Berkeley or something, somewhere there. Let's see. Where is it? There. Professor in mathematical economics. Very good. Padua was, oh no, not in the United States, but in Florence. Yeah, he is, until he went into politics, he was a very well-known economist in Europe especially. And we have to admit he was also a fellow of Goldman Sachs. This is sometimes also good to know that he have also worked for Goldman Sachs, one of the largest investment banks in the world. Okay, and within the European debt crisis, he then, when he came into power when he became president of the ECB, he really then starts to push also the balance sheet of the European Central Bank. Under his presidency, we start to buy the government bonds. Until this, we only decreased the interest rates, and with him, then we started to buy in a huge amount government bonds, and in the high phase, it was an amount from 40 up to 80 billion euros per month. So for a year, you have to multiply this roughly with 10. So with 80, you are roughly then at 1 trillion euros roughly per year, which we bought there. And if you compare this again with the GDP, which countries do you have? UK, what is GDP? Roughly? Roughly 3 trillion US dollars. What else? Japan, I think you had. It is a bit larger. I think it is about 4 or 5 billion trillion. They are now number 4. They are number 3 of the largest economies in the world. But well, the internet knows everything. GDP, Japan. Five. Okay. Yeah. So we can really say there we had a phase where we can really say we started to increase money and not only changing interest rates. So, and in flexible exchange rates, what happens then? Well, of course, again, the LM curve adjusts due to the same arguments before to the right. Then again, we are moving to B. Moving to B means again a fall in interest rates, but this cannot be possible because uncovered interest rate parity. So now the exchange rate adjusts. In the former case, the exchange rate was fixed. We had to rebuy US dollar in the same amount we have created money in euros. But when now the exchange rate has to adjust, this means the euro is depreciating. Sorry, the euro is appreciating. I have to be careful. If the euro is appreciating, no, sorry, I'm puzzled. The other way around, yeah. So we have the lower interest rate, so capital outflow, now I'm right, capital outflow of our country, so a depreciation of our exchange rate. And then we argued we had this negative, where did we had it? Let's go back on. Here, this was the Marshall-Lerner condition. We are here. So here we assumed, due to the Marshall-Lerner condition, that we have an inverse dependence of our net exports on the exchange rate. And if we assume this, then we know now that nx is increasing. If nx is increasing, we have this just in the IS curve. So this means just x minus im in the IS curve is increasing. So what does this mean? If you then remember your ISLM model without the international dependence, there we had y equals c plus I plus g. So then this is correspondingly the same if we increase just g, because these are just two added numbers. If we increase nx or if we increase g, this should have the same impact on within the goods market. And so this means we have a right shift of the IS curve as a consequence. But if we have now these right shift, this has to be done so long as we have again the situation where all new lines cross in the same point. Well, and this means we have not only this impact in the only ISLM model, we have even a larger push from the change of the exchange rate, that we obtain an additional push on our income. Well, and for this, maybe we can also say this was a quite rational policy instrument which we used there during this time. So in this case, monetary policy would be very effective, even more effective than in the situation of versus the closed economy, where we do not have an effect from abroad. Okay, then of course, let's take it the other way around. Now we are using flexible exchange rates. Oh, not monetary policy, this is fiscal policy. Sorry. And let's go also back just some years. When did we have it? Well, when Mr. Trump came into office, well, he did what he promised. Quite often we have politicians and they somehow do what they have promised before. Keep this in mind if you have a look when you hear somebody that some guys will not do what they have promised before. And what he announced is, especially he won the elections during this time, especially in the states, in the United States, around the Great Lakes, the so-called Rust Belt. So the old industrial core some decades ago. Detroit, where all the automobile manufacturing industry was. And these people, they have mostly elected Mr. Trump, and even this was the so-called swing states, which he needed to win the election, although overall in the United States he has had less votes than Hillary Clinton. So in our election system in Germany, he wouldn't have won the vote. Well, anyhow, he did what he promised. He said, I care about you. And this meant, if I care about you, the evil Germans and other evil people should not sell that much goods in our country. So I want to protect our own steel industry mainly, and also the automobile industry. And then he announced tariff on these industrial goods of 25%. And this is quite a lot. You have to sell your products now 1/4 more expensive than before. Well, what does this mean in flexible exchange rates? In flexible exchange rates, this means then that I have the fiscal impact, that I have now these tariff borders, that on the goods market I'm buying now less in the international context. So this means that NX is falling. If NX is falling, we have the argumentation the other way around, that now we are moving to the left with our IS curve. Moving to the left with our IS curve now means that we are also again falling in interest rates, and also we are not selling anymore our products in the United States, so we do not need US dollar anymore. So the demand for US dollar is falling. Flexible exchange rates means exchange rate is falling. If the exchange rate is falling, this means our imports become more expensive. If our import become more expensive, X minus M, this means we have the opposite effect again on net exports. And this then means, okay, we are just shifting due to the exchange rate effect back with our IS curve. So not MP, but fiscal policy, sorry. Oh, why I always have written down here monetary policy, sorry. So this, in the end, then would mean, due to this backshift of IS, that if uncovered interest rate parity definitely holds, that this will almost have no effect on my economy. And the only thing is that I could not, due to this, what he has promised, then, well, I can decline my current account deficit. All the people are selling their goods in the United States. I want that the people buy our own goods, that relatively he could not reduce his current account deficit by the mechanics of just these general macroeconomic model. But I think quite often also what means international trade theory and something like this, that he had not very good advisors because he did very much things where you thought, well, if we are still in an internationally more or less open economy, then you will have effects which you don't want to have. Okay, the last one, since I'm running out of time, is then we could also argue within the monetary policy. We had then the same argumentation that in this case, monetary policy would be very effective as we had it here. So in general, we can say with fixed exchange rates, we have ineffective monetary policy and fiscal policy is effective, and here the opposite, ineffective, would be the case. So then give me 2 minutes, 2 other minutes to end this topic. Then of course we have to admit still, although I argue it quite often, we have to follow the United States. When we take the two regions, we are almost have almost the same size. Of course, if when we are doing something, then there happens also something in the United States. And for this, for a real global model, then we have to, aggregate, so to speak, the both regions, United States and the Eurozone. And for this, then one can make some mathematical trick that, we look then at aggregates where we look once at the sum of both parameters, income and monetary aggregate, and we look at the difference. And with this, we then can more or less write down the same model, just interchanging these variables. But what we then see is that the effects which we have deduced now, monetary policy, is ineffective in fixed exchange rate, the other opposite around, that this does not really hold in general anymore, especially one sees then if we are starting monetary policy, increasing money means that we more or less, beggar the neighbor, that we profit then from our neighbor. And also in this case, this goes then in the direction of game theory, that we have to, that we have an incentive more or less to coordinate with the other one. Think on about the prisoner's dilemma we have talked about. So this is then a push to the side where we can say there is something incentive that we coordinate. This maybe we can say we have seen directly after the financial crisis, where we have more or less a simultaneous action in every countries in the world. But also we have an incentive the other way around to sanction our partner, and maybe this we saw then in the aftermath when we ask why have the Britons voted for the Brexit, and maybe also why do the people in the United States have voted for Trump, and maybe they do it a second time. Okay, then thank you very much for today. And we are then through with the theoretical part.